Welcome to episode 203 of Sports Management Podcast. Today's guest is Chris Marshall, the co-founder of Young Champs, an initiative to bring more young people into tennis. We spoke about how to get more people into sports, what's keeping kids from being active, overcoming the financial barriers to sport, if there is a Marcus Rashford of tennis, and much more. Chris Marshall, welcome to the Sports Management Podcast.
I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you.
Great to have you on the show. You are the co-founder of Young Champs to help more young people into tennis. So can you tell us a little bit about what is Young Champs and why did you start it?
Yeah, so Young Champs was born out of our tennis coaching business, G Tennis. We operate in a park in South London, very small, 2 courts. And we had started our program, I think about 2015. We'd really tried to attract the sort of diverse community that we had. But I think the reality was that most of the kids coming were more typical tennis, tennis background, more middle class, more affluent families. We work with a couple of charities that support children, one that supports sort of single parents and one that tries to sort of keep kids off the street. So we always had that sort of mindset to try and work with these kids, but getting the kids into our regular program was always a bit of a challenge. And it was something I think we were really quite conscious of as well. And then COVID hit and all of a sudden we had a bit more time on our hands. We came out of the first lockdown and you really noticed the difference between the kids that came from the charities we work with versus the kids that didn't. And, very obvious, but, a lot of the kids that didn't had gardens to play in for 3 months. The weather was great in London at the time. Whereas some of the other kids, they'd been stuck in high-rise flats without that outside space. And some of the kids that would notoriously maybe be a little bit more challenging and give me a hard time were subdued, some had put weight on. And I think then when the next lockdown hit, we just thought, right, let's try and do something. So we started a fundraiser. We didn't have a charity at that point, and we set out to raise £3,500 so we could offer 100 free places on a holiday course. There was our governing body, the LTA, had a £35 course where you get 6 hours of coaching. You take a racket home, balls and t-shirts. So we thought, look, if we can raise £3,500, we can offer that to 100 kids. We smashed it, raised about 6,000. And then after the success of the program, the best part, which was never the intention, we could offer a really, really heavily subsidized follow-on. And I think 50% of the children signed up. We offered, I think, 12 weeks at £24, which is probably about €30. And yeah, obviously much, much cheaper. And then it just sort of carried on. And that was in 2021. The kids were all playing, and I was like, right, I'd feel terrible if they sort of had to stop playing, and I would love to offer it all for free, but obviously we have to pay coaches and court fees. And then it just snowballed. And then a couple of years later, we started the process of becoming a charity, it's Young Champs. And yeah, here we are today.
Fantastic. And getting more people into tennis, and you said there are some struggles. So would you say that the financial aspect is one of the biggest, hurdles for some people to get into tennis? I mean, like tennis, golf, horse riding, some sports that have maybe a view of being expensive. So is that one of the hurdles that you felt have been difficult for some people?
Yeah, 100%. And I think I'm always very conscious. People say, that's the nature of an individual sport. It will always be more expensive. But I always sort of think, and this may be wrong, but there's a lot of sports out there that maybe I'd seem to be a little bit more elitist that don't sort of pretend not to be. And I think, we're on this, Britain's, the UK is on this sort of mission to make tennis more inclusive and open tennis up. But I really feel the reality is beyond sort of maybe a one-time initiative, it's very, very difficult for children to carry on. And, and we've proved that by, some of the children that came initially, in the very first sessions we did are still playing with us. And, it might only be once a week, but they're still playing. And some have kicked on to do more and get to a better level, which is fantastic. But I think that is the challenge, is cost. And I think that's why kids always end up playing sports like football, because it's just much, much more accessible.
Yeah, definitely. So in your view, what do you think is the primary reasons why tennis sometimes struggle to reach kids from lower income or diverse backgrounds?
Well, I think, the cost is obviously the big one, but I also think that there's a perception issue. I think, for speaking from previous experience, you'll go into a school, you've delivered a good session, the kids have had a lot of fun and, you give your flyer out. And I really think that even when we've made it really, really cheap, you don't get the take up. And I think parents' eyes roll sometimes. Their perception of what tennis is not a sport for them. And I think that's the biggest challenge that we face in the sport. And one of the reasons for doing this and sort of the charity, and I think we'll talk a little bit about the campaign later, but we have changed our perception in our park. One of the mums said to me a couple of years ago, she was like, I used to think tennis was a posh sport, and I was like, well, that's it, isn't it? But it's changed because people walk past our courts and they see this diverse group of kids playing tennis, and it's as simple as that. It's not easy, but that is the reality. And I think until the visibility changes, I really think it's going to be hard for the sport to change.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you mentioned before that, you would like to give it for free, but there's also, you need to pay coach and there are other costs, obviously, that need to be covered on your end. But, there are some amazing initiatives that you have taken. It's the £2 per hour coaching model. It's the ACE campaign. So can you talk a little bit about these different initiatives that you have taken?
Yeah, so initially the course we did was free in the summer. That was the sort of free at point of contact. And my sort of thing is you get the kids in, give them a great time, and then there's the affordable follow on. So we charged £2, but the money we had from the fundraiser we used to subsidise and top up to, like I say, pay coaches. We don't profit from those sessions. We were happy to sort of break even, and we've always kind of had a mindset that if there's space in a class, why not fill it? If it's sat there empty, it makes sense to have somebody play in the class. And the the ACE campaign, sort of a chance for everyone. We're now trying to say, look, we've had this success. It's been brilliant. It's sort of some of the best, most rewarding work we've done. Would you, as a club anywhere in the country, would you like to sort of try and get on board this train and do something? And there are some great initiatives out there already doing a lot of this kind of work. But my belief is that for this change to happen, the perception needs to be that more and more people are doing it. So we're going to try and bring this campaign under one umbrella. And hopefully in years to come, it will change. But the sort of premise of the campaign is that you as a venue, can you offer 2 hours in your program, or for £2 an hour, basically, like we've done? Or could you open up 1 hour in your program, create an hour where every kid can pay £2? So you can have 10 to 12 children playing in the session, which would obviously create a lot more affordable hours. But the other one is, and this is sort of slightly left field, which I think would be interesting for other clubs and coaches to look at. But if you have court time at your club that's not being used, can you find a way to facilitate and open up so better level children can actually come and practice? I've seen this for a girl I teach. There are a lot of kids out there just desperate to get on court and play more. Park courts in London especially are quite, not expensive to book, but they're not cheap. One of our local parks is about £12 an hour to book. So if you book that for a couple of hours, £24 just to practice. But I know full well, I drive past a club on my way home from work every Saturday evening. The courts are sat there empty, 8 of them every week. And I'm like, these girls and these that we teach that just want to practice, surely they could go and use those courts. And that's the sort of mindset. So, if the courts are free, could you open up and let some of the kids play on them?
Definitely. Have you seen any other challenges like kids today? Maybe, you talk about them being more inside, being on, playing computers, stuff like that, or there are other racket sports. So is that a challenge that you see, or is it mainly the economic factor?
I think there's a huge issue. Kids are spending more time on their phones, and it's interesting that the parents are very aware of that, and I think they're quite often desperate to get the kids out of the house doing something, doing sport, doing an activity. So I think that's probably a challenge for every sport. But I know with tennis it is a difficult game, and I think one of the big challenges is getting the kids to a point where they can play and they can enjoy it. So we're more than happy letting the kids play mini tennis, because they start to get a bit more success. And I think once you do something that looks and feels like a sport, it's much, much easier to get kids to play and stay in the game.
Yeah, for sure. How do you envision the future of community sports, particularly tennis, in fostering inclusivity and accessibility?
It's a difficult one.
Yeah.
But I think, unless there are some sort of systemic changes, it's going to be hard. But I think it's going to be a very, very slow process. The ACE campaign I talked about,
Mm.
I really feel it's a 10-year plan, even longer. The hope with the campaign is if we could get 100 clubs to offer 2 hours a week, that would result in, over a year would result in sort of 10,000 hours. But even 100 venues is a fraction. It's not very many. But if that 100 can grow to 200 to 300 year on year, our governing body have a registration process for clubs. It would be wonderful if in years to come that part of that registration process is that, they have to be seen to doing something like that. But yeah, I think that's it. It takes time. It's conversations. It's having, conversations with people like yourself and people just maybe taking a little bit of a leap into the unknown to do something a little bit differently. I think that's another big challenge. Clubs are busy, coaches are busy, asking them to do something a bit different. But I think I'd say firsthand, it's incredibly rewarding, and you see the gratitude from the parents a lot of the time, the opportunity you're giving their child. Yeah, it's wonderful. And I think, there are lots of other benefits in terms of, I think when you're doing this kind of work, people really sort of think, this, you're doing something good. I think it can give a lot of security for your own program and own work as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you mentioned the ACE campaign now several times, so that's like a good way to scale this, right? Because first you have been in one location more or less, and now this might be a way to grow this over UK and maybe even larger than that in time over time. You mentioned a 10-year plan.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly it. And I just think going back to what I said about coaches being busy, if we can sort of help in any way to sort of show, it's taken us nearly 5 years to get where we are now, and knowing what I know now, that process could have been sped up a little bit. And if we can be a support network for coaches and clubs to help on this journey, then we're all for that. And we'll provide support and all that sort of thing. So if any British coaches are listening, look us up, youngchamps.uk, and there's more information on there. You can sign up and express an interest. That's all we sort of asked for to start with.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, it's important to get the word out there, and you have worked with some players to have partnership with some players like Jack Draper and Fran Jones. So how important have them been in helping promoting Young Champs mission?
Yeah, it's really helpful because as soon as you mention a professional tennis player, the media outlets are a lot more willing to get on, want to give you coverage and all that sort of thing. Jack supported last year, which was great. He sort of put his name behind it, which is brilliant. Fran this year is a player I used to teach. I was her first coach back in my hometown. She played Wimbledon yesterday, didn't get through unfortunately, but nice story. She was I think 5 when she first came and had lessons, so it's really great. But a girl that we've come through the initiative, which maybe we talk about next, has done really, really well. And Sabine, the player she went to practice with Fran a couple of weeks ago at the National Tennis Centre on the grass. We've got some great content. So all this will be going out in the next few days and weeks over Wimbledon to promote it and share it. But it's, incredible story.
Yeah, definitely. So please share the story with Sabine. I mean, that really represents the success of your initiative.
Yeah, and this is sort of everything. And I think it's, we're really proud that we've had hundreds of kids come through the program and try tennis for the first time, and lots have carried on. But one girl that we came through one of the charities we worked with back in probably pre-COVID. It was definitely pre-COVID. She was just a regular kid, but some of the kids, it was more of a social and a bit of a mess about, whereas some of the kids you could see, wanted to take it a little bit more seriously. And again, like I said earlier, I think it was a Monday at 4:00. I said, look, there's a space in the class, go and play. Fast forward a couple of years, there was an email from our local county saying, come to the fun day, which is the talent ID day. So I took her and another girl that came through the program, and they both got picked for the county training, which was just staggering because neither of the girls had had a private lesson. And one thing led to another, but I think 6 or 8 months later, Sabine represented Surrey, and so she's played county, she's got her star, and she's now in the under-12 squad. And she's great, and she's doing incredibly well. And, I've put a lot of work in with her, I've done a lot of free lessons, but, that's great. And we now have a situation where with 4 of our 6 coaches all do an hour a week with her. One does more fitness, one does hitting session, and this is how we've made it work. But she's doing it. She's doing well. But this then goes back to what I was saying about the court times. She doesn't need 10 hours a week of coaching, which is sort of the recommended at that age. She just needs to get on court and practice. And she's got a group of friends, sort of either in the county squad or in the periphery, who are they go around London trying to get on the courts. But, it would be a lot easier if I could say, look, there's a club a couple of miles away, can you let her use the courts and practice? But whatever Sabine's outcome is, if she is a Grand Slam champion, of course, that would be incredible. But I just sort of think she should have a chance to fulfill her potential and see how far she can take it. She loves it. She's a great kid, single parent family. And watch this space. She's a wonderful kid.
Yeah, definitely. And a great story. And really, it shows how important your initiative is and what that can do for a person. And, for her to be able to pursue her dreams in tennis.
Exactly. And as I say, whatever her outcome is, but it could be that she ends up, the college system in America is great. We had a Brit come through 700 in the world and one on Monday. He came through, he's in the college system, hasn't even finished his degree yet. He's got to go back and complete that. So I think that is a really viable pathway with tennis. I think a lot of people see Alcaraz as, which is incredible and think, you have to be the finished article, 21, 20 even, but there is a lot more time. You've got another 5-6 years of development from that age. So if we can keep her in the mix and, she might not want to, she might not want to move abroad, but yeah, just we want to keep the door open. But I think in tennis, I know so many coaches will go into a school and find a kid like that, and getting them on the court is a real challenge. It's either the barrier with the perception from the parents' point of view, or just the cost is far too expensive. If you have a couple of private lessons a week, you might have a group lesson, fitness, tournament entry. You can be talking £700-800 a month. And, this is why tennis is elitist, because that is just completely unaffordable for large sections of the population. I had a middle class parent say to me, I was telling him that, he's like, we're middle class and I couldn't afford that for one of my children, let alone two. So it just shows, and my sort of view is, if every club supported one player, and you never know what the landscape of tennis, more will filter through and think very differently in years to come.
For sure. So, yeah, you have been training, you mentioned you have been coaching these players. So what is your background in tennis and where did you come from, so to speak?
Yeah, I don't really have a tennis background. It all happened quite randomly. No, I was very fortunate. I think you hear this with a lot of sports people, not saying I'm a sports person, but the only indoor centre in the city I live in, Bradford, which is in Yorkshire, was across the road. So I played a bit, I think I did a holiday course in the summer, as you do, and played a bit. I had private lessons at one point, but I had to stop when I was about 14 because my parents just couldn't afford it. And went to university, did a music degree, didn't last very long, and ended up on a gap year. A lot of my friends played at the tennis club. I actually worked behind the bar. It was a great place to hang out, and ended up playing every day. And then I got offered an opportunity to assist my best friend. And then, 25 years later, here I am. So it's a completely different story. But I think one big thing is obviously that me not having that opportunity at 14, obviously if I had have carried on, I would have been a world beater, of course. But yeah, I think that is one of the things. It would have been nice to have carried on, and, I would be better than I am now, I'm sure. Still probably not very good, but that's it. But I think I was given an opportunity and yeah, look where I am today.
Yeah, so it's really personal to you. I think that, that shows. Usually, when you do something and that means something to you, that also shows in the work, right? So, you didn't have that chance at 14, so now you want to give that chance to other players.
Exactly.
That's nice. So, what are some lessons that you have learned during this, experience with the, having through the tennis and also, starting the foundation?
What lessons? Oh, lots of lessons. I was thinking, sometimes you're 2 steps forward and you have a great day, and then you'll meet, you can meet somebody else and something happens and there's a bit of a, you take a backward step. But I think one thing I really try to sort of say to people, if you're part of a club and you feel welcome, you might think the club is welcome and it might be a really welcome environment because you're in the mix. Just try and take yourself away from that and take yourself, back to a position or a time when you didn't feel welcome or included. Maybe it was at school, you didn't get picked for the football team. But I think that's what being inclusive is. It's feeling welcome. It's feeling part of it. And I think, you might be in an environment where you've been there for 10, 15 years and it feels safe and it feels great. But how does it feel for somebody else from the outside? And I think that's the big thing with tennis. If somebody comes in and tries it for the first time, they're not familiar, then, how do you make them feel? And I think that's one big thing that I really want coaches to try and think about.
do you think that your model can be applied to other sports as well? Like, for example, I work in the ice hockey business, which also struggles like a little bit with participation and being seen as a little bit of an elitist. Do you think that some of the like learnings can be, cross sports?
I'm sure, yeah, and I think I suppose it depends on what the barriers are for people to play. I'm guessing ice hockey, it's indoor. I'm guessing it's probably not particularly cheap. There's a lot of equipment. I think these are the things, these are the barriers that stop people. We've had a situation in the UK with cricket. I don't know how much you follow, but there was a bit of a scandal that there's a huge South Asian population play in the country and the town I'm from especially, and they just didn't feel welcome and represented. So they set their own league up in the town I'm from. And I think this is one of the things. It's again going into a club environment and not feeling part of it and not feeling welcome. It just puts people off, and then it almost has the opposite effect. It's almost even more negative. People just shut themselves off and think, well, it's just not for me. So I'm sure there are learnings, and I probably need to have a look at other sports. There's probably other sports doing it better. But I think one thing, if you compare to football, obviously football's a huge sport. If you have a child, we've got a really good kid in our program now who's sort of, I think he's had trials with Chelsea and all sorts of things. And, I kind of say to that parent, you've much more chance with Chelsea or one of the other clubs because they have an academy system. If you are good enough, they will take care of it. And I'm sure there are other conversations to be had about how that runs. But, there is a pathway then. I think that's why football will always be seen as an inclusive sport for anyone. And obviously the representation you see on the television and how diverse the sport is.
Yeah, for sure. But then there are also there are proven benefits of doing several sports for as long as possible. So maybe, if it's possible to do football and tennis for a long time, that's probably beneficial down the road, even depending on which sport you choose in the end.
I couldn't agree more. Sabine, she's 11. She plays cricket. She plays football. She does athletics. And, I could have said even a year ago, no, you need to stop that. You need to do more tennis. But she's 11. And I think this is one of the sort of problems. I think people get very obsessed with tennis, especially that you have to have this finished article by 11, 12 years old. And, she's athletic. And I'm sure a lot of that comes from playing other sports. And there might be a decision to be made further down the line. But I think the more every week goes by, she falls more and more in love with tennis. I think that will make that decision a lot easier. If it is to happen, if she turns around and says, I want to play cricket, I'll be obviously disappointed, but that's fine because I think long term, if you don't love what you're doing, I think it's very, very difficult. And there are a lot of stories of, you hear the stories of the professionals that, have probably struggled in the past, but you never hear the stories of the thousands of other people who don't make it as professionals and end up hating it and mental health issues. So I think I'm a big believer that, if you want to succeed in the time you have to put in, you have to enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. So, has there been any bumps on the road in your career? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I think there definitely has been. But I think more recently, it's the sort of bumps in this journey. It feels like activism at times. You'll have a great win. Somebody like yourself says, "Come and be on my podcast," and you're bouncing off the walls. It's a nice feeling to be able to talk about it. But then we've had a couple of occasions in the last 2 years where two of the literally biggest media outlets have said they will come to the courts, and you get all the kids lined up for it. You get the consent forms done, and then last year there was a train strike and they couldn't get here, and then there's a disappointment of that, and we had it again last week. So there's ups and downs all the time, but it's the wins and it's the sort of, I think the possibility of changing something, I think, is really, really, it's quite addictive at times, and I think you've got to take the wins, not to get too excited, not get too upset when you have the lows, and just try and keep moving forward, keep having conversations with people. But I'm very lucky that I do really enjoy and love what I do.
Yeah. Is that the North Star, so to speak, that, even in tough times, that the mission is worth it?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, you've just got to keep going. I think, when you have, I think this is going back to what I was saying earlier. I know a lot of coaches who've been doing it a very, very long time, and I think some are do amazingly well to keep themselves motivated. And I think something like this is new. And as I say, when you have that, as I said earlier, the gratitude from the parents and the kids, and these kids you're working with, I don't want to sort of be too cliche, but it can be life-changing for them. We've got some older teens who, their opportunities are going to be a lot more limited, and they're keen to get on and start coaching, so trying to help them. And Yeah, it's brilliant. So yeah, has definitely just got to keep that end goal in sight and keep plowing on.
I saw when I did some research here, I saw that someone mentioned like we're seeing something along the lines like the Marcus Rashford of tennis. Is that like a reference that is good that you like?
Yeah, that was an article I wrote last year. I was I think it was the very first time I got asked to speak at an event, and I look back and think I probably stood there and waffled for about 15 minutes. But the first thing that one of the coaches who was part of the forum said to me, and I was just telling him what I do, and he just laughed and went, "There'll never be a Marcus Rashford of tennis." And, I sort of thought about it. I was like, I wanted to kind of prove him wrong. And then you think back and think, there won't be unless, as Sabine, the girl I talk about, has an opportunity. And that is, I think that was the sort of inspiring thing for what I started to do. I wrote that article. It's online. It's in the Guardian somewhere. It's available to read. But it was that just talking about the cost and how difficult it is for a child, and I find it hard. I'm trying to navigate this system, and, we're up against, there's girls in her county squad who are having 5 to 10 indoor private lessons a week. They're flying around the country playing the tournaments that get them the most ranking points. It's yeah, it's a real challenge.
Yeah, I can understand that. You have been in the industry now for quite some time, and maybe it wasn't exactly the path you thought you would take, but you talked about your learnings. But do you have some advice for young people who would like to work in this industry, or maybe the tennis industry more specifically?
Yeah, I think my one big advice, and you see this a lot with younger male coaches, they sort of isolate themselves. I think there's an insecurity that they're either maybe not aware of, and they sort of hide themselves away a little bit. They try to do things their own way. And I think the one thing, and I'm very curious, but I just be a sponge. And what I mean by that is just ask as many questions as you can, soak up as much information as you can, because ultimately that's how you learn. I look back at when I was probably teaching kids 20 years ago, and I don't even want to think it was probably not the best at times. But one thing I did do is keep it fun. And I've always seen my role as a coach, especially when you get new kids at 5, 6, even adults. You need to get kids and people to fall in love with the sport, give them a great experience. But I think further on the line, if you've been doing this for 20 years, find something, and could not even be tennis related. Find something you're passionate about. And I think that is, and it could be a side hustle. It could be a part of the job. It could be our campaign that you want to get involved with. But I think that's it. I think I see a lot of coaches who just get very bored, very stale, and that then translate onto the tennis court, which is not ideal. And, so that would be my thing. I think, for your own mental well-being, I think it is nice to have a job that you do enjoy and you care about.
Yeah. And I mean, usually in sports, most of the case, that's the case, I feel, because, you have played the sport growing up, or you have been, around, and then being able to work in that is usually something that you have a passion for.
Yeah, and I think can work two ways. We have, this is coming from a parent. I have a friend who's another parent, and they play at one of the local big centres. And, he sort of said, the coaches are all generally young men in their early to mid 20s. They've stopped playing. And you'd have to question, do they actually want to be on a tennis court? And I don't know if this is the same in ice hockey or other sports, but I think that's it. And I think a lot of these coaches fall into it because they don't have any other options. There's a lot of money to be earned. And actually, it's frustrating because a lot of these coaches are the ones who get to work with all the best players because they have the playing background. But, I just don't believe you can have the skills to coach 2 or 3 years or even a year into learning your trade. I think in anything, it takes a very, very long time. And I think that is something that I find, and know a lot of other coaches find very, very frustrating.
Is there something I haven't asked you yet? It could be about like the charity or your company or what you do.
Yeah, I've won one thing. This is not sort of me, so we've won quite a few awards for what we do, which is also from a point of view of trying to hook people in, and which is quite nice.
Yeah. So what was some awards that you have won?
Yeah, so in off the back of the first initiative that we ran that was in 2021, we were nominated for the LTA, our governing body, have various awards, coach awards, and we were nominated for the Park Award, which is a lot of tennis is now being delivered in parks, and we were nominated for that, and we won the county, we won the region, and actually won the national award. So obviously, that was a big help in, again, trying to draw attention and say, look, it's, I think it's nice to win awards, right? I think that's your thing. So that was really good. And I think, going back to the parks, thing. You know, we've got this sort of challenge where the governing body and the government have refurbished 3,000 park courts, which is absolutely incredible. But obviously they're very keen on capturing data. So a lot of the park courts have now they've been locked up. So they have a keypad entry. And I completely understand the need for doing that. But one of the problems is a girl like Sabine who, you know, would jump on the court before school, 7 to 8. She might jump on and be able to come back from school at lunchtime and play. Can't access the courts now. So this kind of goes back to the charity initiative and the thing, you know, if these kids can't access the courts without paying for them, you know, I think a lot of these courts were put in as public facilities. They were there for the public to use. And, you know, we always had, it policed itself very well. The people who booked would play, but when they're empty, people would go in and use them. So that's something that, that was a bit of a diversion from the question. But I think that's something that's really, really important to think about. I know so many coaches that will tell you, you know, they would sneak into their local club, they would sneak in the gap in the fence and play. That's just not possible anymore. And I think it's something we really, really need to think about.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's an important point. I like to end on a networking question. So do you have someone from your network or someone that you know that you think would be a good guest on this show?
So a friend of mine, a guy called Shiv Paul, he's been a real sort of a mentor to me and really, really helped me. But he would describe himself as a career volunteer. He's in the EDI world. He's a consultant. But he's just been really good and he's very interesting. He's worked in the US for the USTA. He is now an LTA counsellor. Great insight in tennis. Nice player as well. And a really interesting guy. So I think he'd be somebody you would have a really interesting conversation with.
For sure. Good name. Appreciate that. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you so much. It's been really fun.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the follow or subscribe button on your podcast app so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com, connect with me on LinkedIn, or follow the podcast on Instagram, X, and Facebook @SportsM Podcast.